Greetings, Taku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you all yet again another Vikings episode review right here on Otaku Assemble! Weekly, as always, I'm here to bring you the latest in this week's Viking episode review, and this is my review of Season 1, Episode 2, entitled Wrath of the Northmen. Now, general thoughts on this week's episode. First and foremost, I am surprised with how quickly the story is moving. Because in this episode, we saw the entire maiden voyage for Ragnar and his men going to the west. You know, their first trip. We saw the entire thing in one episode, which was kind of surprising because I figured I had originally thought that they might not set sail until maybe episode 3, and they might not even reach land until episode 5 or 6. So the fact that they actually had their entire maiden voyage just in the second episode, yeah, that means that the story is moving at a pace much quicker than I anticipated, which isn't a bad thing. That just means that now there's so many more things I can speculate about as to what all will happen for the rest of the season. It just seems like everything's moving faster. But in my honest opinion, though, I thought this episode was fair. And that's not to say that it was bad. That's not necessarily to say that it was good. The thing is, this is one of those episodes where we just saw the fulfillment of what we were already promised. They already set up for this in last week's episode, and then of course, if you stuck around to see the previews for the rest of the episodes, a lot of what was in the preview was covered in this week's episode. So like I said, we just kind of saw the fulfillment of what we were already promised. And so, you know, there wasn't anything too surprising in this episode. There wasn't much that we didn't already know or that we haven't already considered. So, like I said, the episode was fair. There were a few interesting, correction. Before I get into the, I guess you could call it the theme or the topic for this week's review, before I get into that, just a few comments about a couple of things. One thing I wanted to note was the role of women in this week's episode. And what I mean is 3 women in this week's episode, that being Lagatha, Earl Haraldson's wife, and then of course the slave girl. And I took note about what role they played in this week's episode, because I think I can't help but think that that's going to play a bigger role later in the season. Now with Lagatha, we know she's going to play a bigger role later in the season, because she's a renowned shield maiden, and of course we saw clips of her fighting alongside Ragnar in later episodes. So we know. I just like though how what they did building on top of their relationship. I find it very interesting that, as I guess you could say, as warm and gentle of a person as she is with her family, that being with her children, you know, as we saw with the story, the bedtime story she was telling them, she is also a warrior. And I just found it funny how that personality or that trait that she has, that warrior idealism, how that counteracts Ragnar, or not really counteracts, but more kind of keeps him in check, you know. So I don't think we'll ever see a scene with Ragnar beating his wife, because she can put a hurting on him just as much as he could on her. I found that very interesting, and when you think about it from that aspect, actually, the more you think about it, man, they really are equals. And this is what I mean. We saw both of them engage in combat, and you could tell just from that scene. Granted, Ragnar was drunk, but she could hold her own against him physically, right? But what was the scene right before that? Ragnar's doing laundry with his wife. Do you see what they did with the with the gender roles there, where normally for this type of story you would think, oh, the man, you know, brawn, head of the household, yeah, warrior, this, that, and the other, and the woman stays at home. But no, we got back-to-back scenes, one with the husband doing laundry and the other with the wife being a warrior. Did you guys catch that? I just found that interesting, and I think as long as they keep building on top of that dynamic, we're going to see a great compare, contrast, dichotomy, and harmony between those two characters in that relationship. Now, Earl Haraldson's wife. All I can say about her so far, just because I don't think she gets enough camera time yet. Now, I read up on Wikipedia that she is going to be portrayed as the politically or diplomatically savvy type of woman. So in other words, you know, she's going to be that behind every great man is a great woman type thing. She's going to fulfill that type of role, but I wonder which route they're going to take with it, because we've already seen the effect she has on Earl Haraldson, just just what she tells him, the whispers in his ear. So is it going to be that type of conciliatory relationship where she's the voice of reason or the voice of sound advice, or is it going to be more of a manipulative thing where she gets Earl Haraldson to do what she wants him to do by catering to either his ego, his paranoia, his fear, so on and so forth? So I'm curious to see how they do that, because it's pretty obvious this character, I think, is going to do a lot of plot progression through her husband. All the strings that she's going to be pulling are going to be done through him. So it's just a matter of time seeing how she does it and for what reasons. And I just wanted to make one more note about the slave girl, the scene when she's raped by Rollo. Now, granted, the second I saw that scene, I'm like, oh crap, she's a slave girl who performed, you know, the pre-sale ritual for the men. So it's like, she's probably supposed to be some type of representation of a priestess or something along those lines, which means she's favored by the gods, which means Rollo doing that bullshit. There's going to be a storm on that voyage, and of course there was. So I'm just wondering if that event, or if things of that nature will continue to transpire throughout the series. Curious to see how that's going to work. And pretty much the big thing, you know, the only thing left, and pretty much the biggest thing to talk about in this week's episode is the theme of fanaticism. We had fanaticism in a bunch of different levels in this episode. You had Floki's fanaticism. Of course, he's the eccentric among the men, you know, the shipbuilder who believes himself to be the descendant of Loki. And so of course we had his fanaticism on the boat when, you know, during the storm where he found out that, you know, the ship can survive a storm, and this, that, and the other. We had fanaticism on the other side with brother, damn, I forget his last name already. What was it? Athelstan, yes, brother Athelstan. We saw his fanaticism with of course the Christian faith, and him thinking that, you know, the storm was a foreboding of Judgment Day and whatnot. And then in a strange way, I don't really know if you can call it fanaticism, but it is very interesting to note Earl Haraldson's paranoia. How it has risen in this week's episode, just with what he was doing back in the city. What with his interrogation of people, his executions, this, that, and the other. His fear of Ragnar is starting to grow to unreasonable stature. You know, for all he knows, Ragnar went on a trip and ain't never coming back. But he's not taking that risk. He's weeding everybody out, and he's weeding everybody out, and, you know, taking heads and taking names. So, but all of those things, all three of those, Floki's fanaticism, Brother Athelstan, and then of course Haraldson's paranoia. All those things I thought were very interesting in this episode, especially the way how they were all, you know, kind of what's the term, weaved together throughout the story. But the one thing that I did find interesting was Ragnar's fanaticism was not present. For the most part, he was very what's the term? Contained, reserved. He was very reserved in this week's episode. You know, I mean, even, yeah, of course, he was happy when he found out that, you know, his navigation technique worked, but still, you know, to me, he was much more fanatical last week than he was in this week's episode. I don't know, maybe you know, the switch has been flicked in his head where it's like, okay, had the dream, know what I want to do, now it's time to get shit done. Now it's time to go to work. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe he wanted to be a little bit more practical, you know, not to appear too outlandish in the eyes of these men that, for all intent and purpose, signed on to a suicide mission. Let's face it, because that's what really happened. So yeah. So all in all, that's my thoughts on this week's episode. In the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this week's episode are, and what are you looking forward to in next week's episode. And with that being said, this is Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, getting ready to sign off. But before I do, I want to remind you all that Totems issue number 1 is now on sale. Links are in the description box below. And with that being said, signing I guess I got to repeat myself now. This is Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, signing off. And until next time, peace.